Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for The Lovebirds. And what The Lovebirds is essentially about is we center on this couple. We have Gibran and Leilani, and these two have been in a relationship for a while now. Things have been going really well. However, they've been dating for about 3 years now, and they're just kind of at a point where things are a bit on the rocks. They're arguing pretty frequently, and things are just not really going that great for them. So after a particularly contentious morning, they end up witnessing this murder go down. This guy gets into their car, says he's a cop. He then repeatedly runs over this guy a bunch of times. So now the two of them are freaking out. They don't really know what they're going to do. So they decide that they're going to go on the run to subsequently try to, basically bring this guy to justice, but also try to do what they can to to exonerate themselves. And hopefully this also gives them a chance to reconnect. And that's really all I'm going to say. So, The Lovebirds overall, I'll be honest, I was pretty much dreading this film. This is one of those films where, before quarantine was a thing, which I know feels like years ago at this point, but before quarantine was a thing, this is one of those films where I just got the trailer for this constantly. It wouldn't stop playing, and it was one of those comedies that just looked so obnoxious and over the top to me, and just not really something that I particularly enjoy watching. So when I heard that it was going to be delayed, it was really the only film that I just didn't really care about. I'm like, all right, fine, I can see that whenever. I'll be spared of it. But then it was announced that it was going to come onto Netflix, so I knew that I was going to have to see it. I still was going to see because, I try to seek out everything I can. But, it finally came onto Netflix. And I will say this, The Lovebirds is not as bad as I thought it was going to be. There actually are quite a few redeeming things about this movie. However, I don't think that as a film, it's quite as clever or as fun as it really could have been either. And so, overall, I do still think this film is pretty disappointing. Despite the fact that I was dreading it, I do think there is... it's definitely a missed opportunity in that way, but we're just getting to right now. Now, right off the bat, I will say the thing that absolutely saved this film is the cast here, but specifically our two leads, Issa and Kumail Nanjiani. Even going into this movie, despite the fact I was dreading it, I assumed they both would give really good performances. They're both really likable actors. I enjoy them in pretty much everything that they do, so I was not surprised at all to see that they really were the bright spot of this movie. Their comedic timing, I thought they worked very well off one another and really showed they have this real chemistry to them. Their banter in this film is very fun to watch, and I just thought they played off each other quite nicely. And it's one of those instances where I really do feel like this film showed that these two can work in a movie together. I want to see them do another movie together because at least here, I think that they very much did carry this movie. I just don't think the film played to their strengths as well as it could. And I really do hope moving forward we get to see more of these two interacting because I definitely felt like they were giving it their all. They were definitely entertaining throughout. And again, if there's anything this film does show is that these are two actors that are always good in pretty much anything they're in. Issa I really haven't found a performance that I don't like her in, and same with Kumail Nanjiani. I pretty much like him in everything. And I just find these two to be very likable in that way. And I think this film very much does show that. I thought their acting was pretty great here for sure. They were definitely the best thing about this movie. Now, in terms of the directing and the writing here, this is where we get to the things that I do think very much do bring this movie down. Michael Showalter's directing is very shockingly uneven, which I'm surprised about because he's a very experienced director. He's done a lot of comedies where he hasn't always just done things like The Big Sick, which obviously, I adore. I think that really was the film that put Kumail Nanjiani on the map, but he has done, straight up comedies before, like They Came Together and things like that. So this is, he really is no stranger when it comes to satirical work. Hell, he was in Wet Hot American Summer of all things, and he wrote and directed some episodes of that. So, he knows what he's doing. So the fact that this film feels honestly pretty uninspired in terms of directing is very surprising to me. I just really felt like Showalter's heart was not really in it here. The jokes are not landing in the way that they are. The point of this movie isn't really clicking in that way, and that really surprised me. I don't know if Showalter was just some guy that they brought onto this project, and this wasn't initially his idea, but it certainly felt that way. It really just felt like he did not have much of an idea of how to go about this at all, and his tone is just not really working here. I really do feel like if this was more of a dark comedy, I think this could be really funny, but because it's just trying to be like your typical raunchy comedy, it doesn't really work at all. I feel like it needed to have more of a style of its own, and it just wasn't really there, and I feel like that's definitely something that really does bring this film down for sure. I think it needed to have a little bit more of an edge to it, and it just really didn't, and again, that was just what was really surprising to me. The writing, though, is another one of my biggest issues with this film. Writing team here, again, I just feel like similar to Showalter's directing, just felt kind of half-assed in terms of their storytelling. And the thing is, like I said, going into this movie, I really was dreading it, but watching this film, you actually do have a really fun concept here. The way the film starts off, setting up this couple, showing them, you know, at the height of their relationship, I thought was really good, especially when we start to see the stark contrast between them at the height and them now, where they're just arguing constantly about something as little as one of them wanting to be on the Amazing Race and them kind of going back and forth over it. I thought was really well done. I was like, okay, this is a really good setup. This is telling us what we need to know in a small increment of time, and I was impressed by that, and I thought they were doing a good job there. I actually was laughing quite a bit at, you know, the beginnings of this movie. The first, I want to say 15 minutes, I actually was kind of into, but once the actual mission goes down, it just becomes really uninteresting. And I think the biggest reason is because after a while, you start to realize this film isn't going to be anything more than what it really is, which is really just, you have these two people that are supposed to be just normal people, but really they're just kind of stupid. They're really just very moronic in that way. They make so many decisions in this movie that no human being would actually make. There's so many things that they do here that are just really questionable. And again, Ray and Nanjiani definitely do heighten it a bit. They do what they can to try to, you know, make it a little more tolerable. And I think they do a mostly good job with that, but it doesn't change the fact that these characters just really aren't that great. I don't really know that much about Gibran or Leilani from a surface, aside from a very surface level. I don't know much about who these characters are. I don't understand why they care so much about the things that they do, and I wish we would have gotten a little bit more insight into them. I feel like the best parts of this movie for me is when this film actually does slow down and focuses a little bit more on these two and them slowly starting to, you know, fall back into that relationship, reminding themselves of why this relationship was once working. I thought those were the best moments in this movie. And the problem is, that's not the whole movie. Most of the movie is just wacky hijinks, and most of which just are not very funny. And I don't think it's because the setup is that bad. Like, in the trailer, you know, they constantly showed that scene with, like, Anna Camp and Kyle Bornheimer, and then, like, trying to torture them with, like, bacon grease. You know, they had the choice of, like, getting kicked in the face by a horse or bacon grease to the face. You know, that was basically their choice, and I don't think that's a bad setup, and I like the way it starts up with them kind of being at odds at first, but it doesn't really go in a funny direction. It's really just, he's kicked by the horse and then wants to take the grease, and just things like that, I think, is an example of just how lazy a lot of the humor really is here. I think there needed to be something a little bit more witty here. It needed to have a bit more of a bite to it, and it wasn't really there. It also doesn't help that the mystery that they're solving just really isn't that interesting at all. It's not really about, let's find out who actually did it, because it's obvious who did it from the beginning. It's more of, let's just try to get ourselves out of it, and you're just kind of waiting for that to happen, because the way they consistently put themselves in harm's way and are constantly making themselves look suspicious at basically every turn that they can. Remember, these guys are not guilty, but they're doing everything they can to make themselves suspicious. There's a scene where they call up their friends because they're, you know, their friends are like calling them up because they have to go to this party and they have to like bring something, and the way that they try to dodge it just makes them sound so sketchy sketchy in that way. And again, it doesn't necessarily make for a fun, you know, it doesn't make me laugh. It just makes me think, wow, these characters are just really that dumb. And I don't think that was well written at all. I feel like it could have been a lot funnier. I feel like there was more that you really could have done here, and they just didn't really do that at all. And especially when we get to the climax of this movie, it really makes this entire film feel kind of pointless. When you realize just how easily it was for them to get themselves out of this situation, it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, well, why didn't you just do that in the first place? And I get it. It's because we need a full movie, but it doesn't justify why they had to go through all of this bullshit in the first place. It's not one of those things where it's funnier because that. If anything, it kind of holds the movie back. I don't know, I really just feel like there was a lot more interesting stuff you could have done with this, and the film just did not take full advantage of that, and as a result, it just isn't nearly as funny, I think, as it should be. So yeah, the writing here, I don't think is particularly that great. I think it's really weak overall. It also doesn't help that the cinematography in this movie is some of the blandest that I have seen in a very long time. Look, I understand this movie is on Netflix, but and it was supposed to be in theaters, which is really baffling to me because for a film that's trying to be so fun and energetic and just have a real, like, you know, fast-paced sort of attitude, the film is so boring to look at. It's very gray. It's very muddy in that way. It's just not very pleasant to look at, and it just looks very half-assed. And I just can't believe that this movie was originally going to be in theaters, because it just at points is very ugly to look at, and I don't think they did a very good job in terms of cinematography at all here. So that definitely does bring it down. I will say the score in this movie I actually did like quite a bit. I thought it had a really nice, like, synth sort of feel to it, and I appreciate the fact that it wasn't just a typical comedy score. It actually did stick out quite a bit, and it was definitely one of the best things about the movie. They don't play it a lot, but whenever it came up, I definitely noticed it, and the fact that I noticed it, I think is a good indicator that it was definitely a pretty good score. So I definitely did enjoy the score here for sure. And the editing, I ultimately think that's another thing that really brings this film down. I really just think this film is far too short. It's short in the sense where the setup is pretty rushed. Them going through all of these sort of wacky hijinks is very much rushed, but it also really is a disservice to our villain in the movie, Paul Sparks, who never really feels like a threat. You know that he's the villain, but you don't really feel his presence throughout the movie. He only pops up like 2 or 3 times here, and I feel like he should be in this a lot more, just so we can be reminded of how big the stakes are. You could also really play up on the comedy there, and they just didn't really do that, and I think that also really just weighs the movie down. Ultimately, The Lovebirds is not a terrible film, but it is a film that, the more I think about it, the more I just sit back and think about how much better it really could have been, especially because of how good its 2 lead actors here. The film just doesn't really do them any favors at all. It doesn't do anything to heighten their talent. It doesn't really do that convincing of a job to tell this story. It rarely made me laugh at all. Maybe it got a few chuckles out of me, but the comedy just doesn't really hit that much. The story itself just isn't that interesting, and honestly, this is one of those films where I know it was supposed to be in theaters, but I really do think it belongs at Netflix, because it really does have that feel, not just because of the fact that I think this film will do far better on Netflix than it ever would have in theaters. I really don't think it would have done all that well, but also because it really has the feel of most Netflix comedies. It feels disposable. It feels mostly forgettable. I saw this film about 2 days ago, and I've almost completely blanked on it. It's just not really a memorable film. It's a film to watch, I guess, if you just need a really disposable comedy, but other than that, I just don't really think this one had all that much to offer. So I am going to give The Lovebirds overall a C. But over, guys, in my review of The Lovebirds, the most guys saw this movie overall. If your thoughts on it, we'll see you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.